On the evening of the 6th of March 1987, the Herald of Free Enterprise capsized so quickly that not even a distress call had been transmitted. The Herald had been carrying 459 passengers, 80 crew, and a cargo of 131 vehicles. The Herald had berthed at number 12 dock at Zeebrugge, Belgium, but because of an unusually high tide, she had to flood her ballast tanks to lower her bow, so that vehicles could load onto G-deck. This was the usual procedure in Belgian ports. The Herald did not have draft meters, so the captain didn't know how much clearance he had. It was the officer in charge's responsibility to correct the ship's trim at a later stage. On March the 6th, that officer was not on the car deck. Neither was the assistant bosun, whose job was to close the bow doors. He was asleep in his cabin. At 6:05, the Herald set sail. Her bow doors were still open.
The crew firstly forgot to close the doors, and neither did they check that the doors had been closed and put to sea before they should have done. Although I have to say that at that time it wasn't an uncommon practice to do this, certainly within a few hundred yards of the jetty.
Unaware of this, at 6:25, the captain pushed the engine speed from number 4 to number 6. Her speed was now approaching 15 knots.
Primarily, the Herald of Free Enterprise went to sea with its bow doors open. It was trimmed by the head, and as it built up speed, the bow wave started to enter the ship through the bow doors.
With heavy forward ballasting and an increased speed approaching 18 knots, the bow wave rose dramatically and flooded onto G-deck. No one could see or hear it, but the Herald was taking on water at a rate of 1,000 gallons a second. At 6:28, she listed to port, then to starboard, and turned through 180 degrees. The entire capsize took less than 40 seconds. It was the speed of the capsize which most terrified the survivors. 193 people had died, 1 in 4 of all the passengers.
It obviously had a big impact. All these factors came together and forced people to look again at the safety regulations and also the operating procedures on board ro-ro ferries.
The Herald's operating procedure was called the negative reporting system.
The negative reporting system I understand that they had on board was that if everything was okay, then the master assumed that it was okay unless he heard to the contrary. So the vessel sailed and the master assumed that the doors had been closed rather than actually being informed that the doors had been closed.
There are 3 main types of ferry door. The visor, which swings up to load and unload, wing doors, which slide back along the side of the ship, and clam doors, which open on side hinges. Behind each kind is a ramp, which forms an inner door and seal.
The design of those doors are quite critical, but also the way in which they are checked to make sure that they are closed before the ship leaves port. This is the problem, of course, with the Herald.
As early as 1985, Townsend Thoresen captains had been asking for indicator lights and closed-circuit TV to let them know when the doors were closed. These requests were persistently rejected. Within days of the Herald disaster, however, bridge indicator lights and closed-circuit television were fitted on all Townsend ships. In 1983, Townsend Thoresen's The European Gateway capsized after a collision with another ship. 6 people died. Like the Herald, she settled on a sandbank.
The European Gateway in 1983 was the first warning sign that there was something seriously wrong with these ships. The cause is not of really great importance. The important factor is that water can, by some means, get onto the car deck. Now, if the car deck is open to the sea, the ship is liable to capsize in a few minutes, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. So we have a phenomenon of rapid capsize of ro-ro ferries due to water on the car deck, which most people would find totally unacceptable.
But why do these ro-ro ferries capsize so quickly?
Well, most ships will go over to an angle of heel and then come back again. That's the righting moment that is built into the ship. So most ships could come back from 20 degrees quite easily. When you have water getting onto the car deck, it creates an unsettling moment on the ship. We call it the free surface moment. But if you take a basin of water and try to carry it, you will find that the water will move to one side and you have to keep correcting it. It's the same effect on a ship. The moment or the weight of the water moving to one side will be a greater moment than the righting moment for the ship to keep it afloat. And in that case, the ship will capsize.
But if the safety of a ship is dependent on whether water gets onto the car deck, could the capsize be slowed down by giving it extra buoyancy?
It's not difficult to design a ship so that it doesn't capsize rapidly. And there are at least half a dozen ways in which this is possible. One which generally receives publicity is, in fact, the subdivision of the car deck by bulkheads. This, of course, won't contain the sea for very long, but it will at least prolong the time so that people can get off and the ship can sink later without anybody on board. One can add sponsons to the side. They can be fixed sponsons, like big tanks, bolted or welded to the side. They can be inflatable ones, either permanently inflated or inflated at the moment the master decides. There are other solutions. There is a down-flooding solution which allows the water on the car deck simply to go through holes or gratings. So all of these are well known, they're well engineered. Many of them have been taken to the point where they could be applied, but I have to say hardly any of them have yet been applied.
7 weeks after the tragedy, the Herald was finally brought to the surface. The debate now turned to whether the inclusion of added bulkheads or barriers could possibly have saved her.
I think it would have at least delayed the incident and probably would have made the crew more aware that something was wrong, rather than, it would have given them time to make another decision.
Time was something the passengers didn't have. The question of escape from a capsized ship was brought sharply into focus when the intensity of the devastation was seen. International maritime law lays down fixed times for all passengers to be evacuated from a ship safely.
All escapes are on the assumption that the vessel doesn't capsize. At the moment, we have 30 minutes evacuation time, and this is from the time from when all your passengers are mustered in the right places and then getting them off the ship.
My institution, for example, did recommend to the Select Committee on Transport in the House of Commons that there should be an aim, a goal of some sort, perhaps an hour, perhaps 2 hours, so that when the ship is in extremis, there will be some possibility of getting people off in a reasonable time. This was not found acceptable, not because it wasn't a good idea, but because it can't be put into law.